Welcome back to the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. It's Monday, May 20th, 2019. First time in a little while here on the Sports Podcast. Today, talking about Zion Williamson and his decision that he has to make. The Pelicans now have the number one overall pick in the draft. Some people are saying, should he try to force the New York Knicks' hand or the Pelicans' hand to try to get to New York? I'm going to touch on that and what I think he should do. But first, before we jump into that, remember, you can check out the podcast on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen to podcasts. But the official home for everything that I publish is JacksonNeillPodcast.com. That's where you can catch all the episodes of my sports podcast, my music one, and my interview on Anything Goes with Jackson Neill. So with that said, let's jump right into this. The New Orleans Pelicans recently won the number one overall pick in the NBA draft lottery. And as such, they're expected to take Zion Williamson, who is clearly hands down the best player in college basketball last season. He is the best player available. It's kind of like LeBron back in 2003, the draft lottery, it's a sweepstakes to try to get him. Similar to the last time New Orleans won the number one overall pick when Anthony Davis was available, he was kind of the clear-cut number one guy. It's the same thing this year. Zion Williamson is going to go number one overall. However, it was a little bit of a shock when New Orleans won the number one overall pick. Many people had expected the New York Knicks to win it. After all, you know, the team that with like the worst record, one of the worst records, they had one of the biggest chances to win that number one overall pick. And even though it's one of the largest chances, you got to remember in the NBA draft lottery, the largest chance is still not even really 20%, you know, still barely any percent at this point. So with that being said, it was definitely not a sure thing for the New York Knicks to get the number one overall pick, but yet many people were expecting that. And as they were expecting it, they expected Zion to possibly go to New York, and there's all these links to rumors. I mean, I even touched on it on my sports podcast throughout the NBA season, whether it's Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant, the cap space that New York has to possibly pair a star or two alongside Zion. And now with the Pelicans getting the number one overall pick, it seems like all that's gone out the door. However, people have brought up the idea that Zion could pull that, force a team's hand to draft him. Say, I'm not going to play in New Orleans. I want to go to New York. And whether that is, you know, he still hasn't signed an agent. He still hasn't signed any deals with Nike or anything. He could go back to Duke. That is a move. And he said in his recently when he came out for the draft, there's a very difficult decision to leave Duke without winning that national championship. That he loved playing at the university. Now, obviously, as you know, the current NBA landscape, he's an obvious one-and-doner, but that's still a possibility. He could go back to Duke, and he could threaten that if the Pelicans, you know, if the New York Knicks don't get the number one overall pick. Or you just threaten not to play for New Orleans. No matter what it is, he has the options in order to kind of force the hand, kind of say, I'm not going to play for you. And while I'm not sure if he would do this, I think the one thing of him saying that it was a very difficult decision for him to leave college, I think that almost maybe set him up just in case he wanted to go back. He could always say, hey, I did mention it was a difficult decision for me. I don't think that means he will go back, but I think it kind of leaves that door open. You know, he said that if he could, he really wanted to stay. So it kind of leaves that door open a little bit. And as people discuss this, I kind of have my own thought on it, but before I jump into that, really, I kind of want to address the concerns that some people even have with the fact that Zion can do this. And many people disagree with the fact that Zion, or any player in general, could possibly have the power to force a team, even when they have the number one pick, to not pick them. And I think this goes back to this conversation we have a lot of times about athletes in professional sports. And yes, we look at these athletes and we look at the multi-million-dollar contracts they get and, you know, the star lifestyle that the best players receive. And even the players at the end of the bench are making a lot of good money, close to millions of dollars. It's, you know, as a consumer, you just view these players as, oh wow, you know, they're already set and made. They have a lot more money than the average American person. So it's almost hard to kind of go on their side sometimes. But the thing you have to remember is that these leagues are run by people way richer than these athletes. Billionaires are the owners in these sports, or the, whether it was the commissioner getting millions upon millions of dollars, larger salaries than even the athletes and most of the athletes themselves. So when you take that into consideration and how much money that is made off of these athletes, yes, they get paid millions of dollars to play. And I think the NBA and I think baseball, especially, football's kind of getting there, have done a really good job at compensating these players fairly, at saying, okay, there's no product without you guys. We're going to give you a fair share of the revenue generated. I think those two sports, baseball and basketball, have definitely, especially, recently, taken a lot of great steps to give the athletes the money that they really, truly deserve. But at the end of the day, there is no NBA without the players that make it. So I completely agree with when players kind of do that kind of power move, when players exercise their ability, exercise their right to say, hey, I want to go to this team. I'm not going to play for you. I think Zion has every right to do that. It's his life. It's his basketball career. Now, with the way the NBA is set up, he could say, I'm not going to play for you, Pelicans. And if he declares for the draft, the Pelicans could still say, well, we're going to draft you. Now, I would not recommend that for a franchise, but that could still happen. If he really wants to put it all in his own hands, all in his own control, he would simply and he wanted to go to New York, he would simply either not declare until the New York Knicks were able to get that number 1 overall pick, or just go back to Duke, or something along those lines. But if it is his career, it is his life. I think it's within his ability and within his right as a basketball player to not just be beholden to just a bunch of billionaires making the rules in that league, where if he doesn't want to go to that team and he's kept his options open to go back to Duke and all, it's his right to go back there. I mean, why not? If he does not want to play for that team, then I would go back to college if I were him. So I think he absolutely has the authority and should have the authority to force a team's hand, to say, I'm not playing for you guys. But here comes the kicker. Here comes the thing that I'm disagreeing with a lot of people, is the idea that the New York Knicks is such a valuable destination. And what I mean by that is that I've always been a player. If you've listened to my podcast or if you listen to me over the years, I've always thought that people, free agents would be attracted to the New York Knicks because it's a historic NBA franchise that really has not won a lot in its history. So if you bring a title to New York, you are going to be beloved. You are going to be, that upper echelon in NBA history because you were able to bring success to New York. With that being said, the reason that you're beyond that upper echelon is because not many people have done it. Even a player as great as Patrick Ewing was never able to bring a title to New York. They've only ever won 2 championships, and that was back in the 70s. It's a franchise that has not been able to win for decades upon decades. And recently, they've been owned by James Dolan, who, when you look across the board in the major sports, has got to be up there as one of the worst owners in sports. So if you're a player like Zion Williamson, keep in mind, yes, he has all this hype, but he's still a rookie. He's not somebody like LeBron. He's not somebody like Damian Lillard or Steph Curry or Kevin Durant, already established star players in the league who could possibly go to a New York Knicks team and kind of change the culture themselves because Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, they bring the star power with them. Zion Williamson is still just a rookie. He's still never played an NBA game. So if you're an incoming rookie, why would you want to play for the New York Knicks? What is so attractive about the New York Knicks? I look at the recent history of this team. I look at the history in general of this team, and it doesn't seem to be like a franchise that I'd want to go to. There's certain franchises in sports, in the NBA and wherever, that have that history of winning. Where I don't care what the Spurs' record was last year, usually, they're pretty solid in the front office. That whole Kawhi thing was a little odd, but for the most part, they're a winning franchise they know what they're doing. The Celtics, the same way. The Lakers sometimes, the past recently, kind of getting a little crazy over there in LA. The Knicks have are not a winning franchise. They just have not been that. And if you're Zion, the appeal of New York is obvious because everything is bigger in New York. That's still incredibly true. I think you have to look at a player just like Odell Beckham Jr. to prove that, where having that his career-defining catch in New York, it meant so much more because he was in New York. He became such a bigger star because he was playing for the Giants. So I think that the New York draw is really there. But as a franchise, man, I don't understand the want to play for New York. Now, I think the response to this might be, well, what's the particular draw for New Orleans? And when you look at New Orleans' roster, it has pieces, but there's still some unknowns. I think that obviously the biggest unknown is Anthony Davis, but if you're Zion Williamson, if you could go to New Orleans where there's a point guard in Drew Holiday, a guy who's been around the league, who has that solid NBA experience, filled with a roster of some other, good players, a player like Julius Randle, who's, been in the league, kind of, went from LA to New Orleans, who could teach you some things, and not to mention that especially if Anthony Davis stays, a player like Anthony Davis to take you under his wing, or even if he goes, that's going to leave some cap space for New Orleans. I don't think they're going to get a superstar or anything, but they're going to be able to add to some quality free agents. And while it's not a traditional winning powerhouse, it's a franchise that had recent postseason success. Just the other year, Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday took the team further into the playoffs than you would expect. And sometimes when you're a player like Zion, a player who's been in the national spotlight for years and years and years, it's crazy to think about it, but I've been hearing Zion Williamson's name for at least about 2-3 years now. The kid's 18. When his highlight tapes were blowing up at like 15, 16 years old, then it was this crazy recruiting talk about where he was going to go, eventually goes to Duke. An entire season, it seemed like, surrounded, focused on this one player, all the networks constantly talking about him. I don't know if the best thing for him would then just be to go to New York, because then you're just even more in the spotlight. And frankly, with all of that talked about, maybe Zion Williamson's star as the quote star athlete is big enough at this point where he can go to New Orleans and still get that shoe contract. I mean, in the current landscape of the NBA, it's not like it used to be. I think a lot of people have come to accept that. There are bona fide superstars, people who sell shoes and who are the face of the league, that play in Oklahoma City, Paul George and Russell Westbrook. Yes, I know LeBron went to LA, but just for most of his career, he played in Cleveland. Not the traditional media kind of attention place. Even some place like Golden State. Yes, they're in that Bay Area, but that even usually hasn't been a traditional NBA powerhouse with a lot of stars in the national spotlight, and even they're proving that. So I think in this current NBA landscape, and the way that social media, national TV, televised games, and everything, Zion could still go to New Orleans, and if he's a superstar, he's going to sell a lot of shoes. The name recognition he already has, I think he's a player that doesn't even need New York. So if you want, talking about him as a star, just as a name who is in this, in towards the top of sports when you think about star players and their superstar caliber and how big of their name is, how many shoes they can sell, how many times they're in the headlines. I think Zion is already going to enter the NBA pretty far ahead on that list, ahead of a lot of current NBA stars. I mean, I look at the playoffs right now. Who's a bigger star in basketball right now, Zion Williamson or Damian Lillard? It's a legitimate question. For the casual basketball fan, who in their eyes is that bigger draw of a name? Yes, I know Damian Lillard is already possibly a first-team point guard, I think, for this season. Yes, I know he's established, but that name, that draw of a name, I think Zion's at his level, if not more. So if Zion's already at that level, that's one of the main things I think New York could possibly provide. Then you look at the roster, where as of right now, Anthony Davis is still in the Pelicans. Now, they're saying he doesn't want to stay, and I don't think Anthony Davis is going to start the season with the Pelicans. I think he's going. I think that's kind of accepted by now. But even with that taken into account, if you're Zion, I mean, playing with a point guard like Jrue Holiday, a guy who has been in the NBA for years now, a veteran who's going to be able to get you the ball, playing alongside someone like Julius Randle, a guy who who's been pretty productive in his career, who's kind of had his ups and downs and who could help you out with some tips. I don't understand the negativity surrounding the Pelicans. Yes, they're not going to be an amazing team. Any team that's at the top of the lottery is not going to be that good. And frankly, entering the league as a 19-year-old, I don't think anybody really expects Zion to dominate. Even a player like Anthony Davis, as good as he was, he still needed several years to adjust. The way this NBA is right now is even these top guys at the top overall picks, they usually need a season or two or three to really get going under their belts. They're going to have, I think Zion's going to be an obvious Rookie of the Year candidate. But before we start to talk about All-Star team appearances, before we start to talk about maybe even All-NBA appearances, anything crazy like that, you're going to have to spend some years. And I don't understand this negative thing around the Pelicans when I think they would have a more friendly roster with some veteran presence to help Zion. I think they have a more friendly roster in addition to being a franchise just with the only way I can say this, not being owned by James Dolan. Not being owned by one of the worst owners in sports. So Zion deserves to be able to have the authority to say, I'm not playing for a team. He absolutely deserves that. But I don't understand why you would want the New York Knicks over the Pelicans. In recent history, the Pelicans have shown a better job of curating talent and of putting together a squad. They didn't draft Jrue Holiday. They didn't draft Julius Randle. But they got some solid pieces in there. They found some solid people in free agency who have, Jrue Holiday's a player who has stayed around for that franchise. Meanwhile, the New York Knicks, constant rotation of players coming in and out of that franchise. They don't historically win, and recently they don't win. Seems like every year and a half they make some boneheaded trade where they trade away a lot of their picks. I don't get it. Yes, you're in the Eastern Conference, but I think the Pelicans are a way more attractive place for a player like Zion Williamson, for any rookie to go, than the New York Knicks. If I was Zion, I would much prefer to go to the Pelicans, because at least it's a franchise with at least some semblance of stability. And that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, you can catch this and my other podcasts on JacksonNeillPodcast.com, the official place for everything that I publish. Also, if you're a fan of my podcast, maybe you should head over to Patreon. There you can find some bonus content. I just added a new tier at $1 a month, the cheapest tier I have, the Sports and Music Podcast tier. So let's just say you really like my Sports and Music Podcast, really like my sports podcast, not a big fan of Anything Goes, subscribe to that one. There you'll get a bonus content, bonus sports segment at the end of every single month, about 15-20 minutes in length, in addition to my favorite album of the month, another 15 to 20 minute segment. That comes at the end of every single month. If you like my Anything Goes interviews, get bonus content for every single one of those too if you go to the $3 a month package. There's a lot of other packages on there, but just remember, this podcast is just done by me. Everything is done by me, so any little bit of support helps. I'm a college student, and any little bit of support goes a long way. Also, down in the description are links to my social media accounts, at JacksonNeil20. I've been posting on those more recently, so if you want to keep up to date with me on Twitter or Instagram, just give me a follow on there. Well, that's everything I have to say. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you all next time.